Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lauren Jepson, the Executive Vice President of TVIB. I have Caleb King, our Senior Operations Manager, and Rick Dunn with you today. I want to welcome everybody to this month's installment of TVIB Talks. We're kind of coming to you with a little bit different forum than we've done in the past. Normally, we have this session every other month for our TVIB members, auditors, and surveyors. We invited Rick here today to talk to everybody about a topic that really pertains to anybody that's TSMS option, and that's about the designated person. So just want to introduce Rick a little bit. Not sure if everybody has had a chance yet to interact with him. Rick is the president of SafeMARINER, which is a consulting business that provides safety management, ISM code, TMSA, internal auditing, etc. activities. He worked as the vetting manager for ExxonMobil for a number of years and is currently an instructor for the Massachusetts Maritime Academy, which is where he's coming to us live from today. Rick, really appreciate you being here, and we want to thank the Maritime Academy for letting us use their systems here to have this conversation today. So I'll turn it over to you.
Absolutely. Thanks for inviting me. It's great to participate. So we're going to talk about designated person, and please ask any questions. I may not know the answer. It's an important subject. Where did this whole designated person thing come from? It's in the ISM code, but it stems from the Herald of Free Enterprise, which was a big roll-on, roll-off ferry. They had these big bow doors like you see on a lot of big ferries. Some of the captains had written to management in letters and said, we need an indicator light on these bow doors so that we know they're closed on the bridge, the light, red or green. That came out in the Board of Inquiry. This started leading towards the ISM code. The ferry shipped water. The doors were left open. They weren't checked by the chief officer, the guy that's supposed to close the doors. He fell asleep. Large vessels shipped water onto the main deck, and it went on board, and then free surface effect rolled over, and 193 people drowned. And it was a horrible situation. So that's really where the whole concept of designated person comes from. If someone on board a vessel sees a really important need or issue related to safety, that there's a mechanism to get to top management. So what you have here is the ISM code, which some of your companies, a few do, has one version of the designated person, almost identical to ISM, but not exactly the same. And then SUBM has a version. So if you look at the ISM in RCP, it really says needs to be a link between the company and those on board. That's anyone on board having direct access to the highest level of management, which probably is your president. And it doesn't mean they have to be a direct report. That's a person you can call and get that information to the top of the company. That's the concept. The other concept, both in RCP and ISM, is that the safety and pollution aspects of the vessel's operation, how good it's working, is the shoreside organization providing what the mariners need to safely operate that boat or that ship. And then we look at SUBM. So SUBM talks about the designated person responsible for ensuring the TSMS is implemented and continuously functions throughout management in the fleet. So that's strong language in a regulation. So responsible for ensuring implementation. In my experience, in my consulting and working with a couple of law firms, sometimes a company could find themselves, if God forbid, a really bad incident occurs, fatality, a really, really big spill, wipe out a bridge, cars drive into the water, those type of events. The Coast Guard will do an incredibly thorough investigation, and I have seen them, I don't know if the legal term is charge, but they will say you're not implementing your safety management system, and we're going to do something about it. They might issue a major nonconformity, they might pull the DOC or the TSMS certificate or whatever you're operating under. So the other part of SUBM is the designated person. In that section, it says the company has to also appoint a person charge of emergency response, which is fine. Some people will say the DPA has a target on their back legally. So we like to show people how we think you can do to protect your interest as a DPA, management's interest, the company's interest, and comply with what the Coast Guard wants, what the TPO wants, and that sort of thing. We think the designated person should be in writing. An org chart with a dotted line might be sufficient. A job description for the DPA is probably a good idea. Keep it thin, mean and lean. Sometimes less is more. This might be a case. A question comes up, should the DPA have a log? And probably not a bad idea. If you're doing that, it is not protected because it's part of your normal business process, which eliminates the ability to protect that information under attorney-client privilege if you're using a normal business process. Okay, DPA cannot be an internal auditor. That is very clear in the regulation, but some companies, I know we see that companies mix that up. The DPA, if you read the rule really carefully, DPA can't be an internal auditor. Then there's another section that says are involved with implementing the safety management system should not audit unless, because of the size and nature of the organization, then they could audit. I know some of your companies may only have a handful of people shoreside. So in that case, you're going to be involved with the implementation of the TSMIS. You can be an auditor, but your DPA cannot. I'm not sure why the Coast Guard did that. My guess is they had a bad experience with a company with a DPA and audits. That would be my guess. Why not have the DPA being involved in internal audits? So under the ISM code, you can do that. Now, if you're a company that does both ISM and SafeMARINER, it's not clear which way you have to go here. I would follow both sets of rules unless you get a clear ruling from the Coast Guard, because it's very confusing. But here's what I would do. Since the designated person is responsible for ensuring the implementation of the TSMIS, which is a big responsibility, why not have the designated person watch, talk, consult, but he or she's not an auditor, and list it that way right in your audit report. Be fully open. So that's what I recommend to my clients. And we actually run a course, a one-day course for DPA and management on how to ensure you're meeting these regulations, these objectives of the subchapter.
So you mentioned ISM is a little bit different in their definition to subchapter M. RCP is a little bit different. Do you have any advice for companies that are RCP and following subchapter M and how they handle that?
Yeah, so I would definitely do both. So hopefully you have some requirements for the DPA in your TSMIS. I would assume the auditor, the third-party auditors will check for that, but there should be some job description, some process for the DPA. But I would make sure that you address all the pieces, requirements of RCP and subchapter M, because the RCP accepted as your standard to develop your TSMIS, right? RCP itself is not a TSMIS. It's a standard that you then write your TSMIS. Hopefully I answered the question.
This language about the TSMIS being fully implemented, the responsibility of the DP for fully implementing the TSMIS is really broad. Do you have suggestions for those individuals who might be participating about what that means, what that looks like from a practical standpoint?
Yeah, I think it's very important, and this is what we cover in our training course for managers and DPA. But one of the key things is paint a picture in your TSMIS and in your actions and in your records that the DPA, and in the DPA's job description, that the DPA has oversight or witnesses or tests or whatever you want to use or the right language of key. What would that mean? Maybe the DPA observes the internal audit. Maybe the DPA participates in incident investigation. Maybe the DPA is participating in a risk assessment. That's what I tell my clients, and put that in the TSMIS. Don't lock it down that the DPA has to go to every day. Use broader language is what I would do, and then I would keep those records and tell your TPO, tell your auditor, tell them what you're doing and why. Keep it very transparent. Our DPA witnessed this audit to help ensure the implementation of the TSMIS. Take the words right out of the regulation. Only do this stuff if it's accurate and factual. But I think that's what I would do. Practical things like that.
We have some customers who their org chart might say that the president of the company, because they're the highest level of responsibility anyway, is the designated person. Do you agree with that practice? Do you have any thoughts on why that might be a good thing or some pitfalls for claiming that person as the DP?
Well, I've run across this, and I suspect it's fine. And I think it makes sense because, look, the management systems are about management accountability. That's what they are about, management accountability. And to make the president the DPA makes sense in this small organization. Culture is such that the people on the boat are willing to talk to that person. Now, my experience dealing with the river industry, which river and coastwise, is that's generally the case. Family-owned companies, these smaller organizations, have a great rapport with their people, but you would want to be careful that they understand that it's okay to call the boss about an issue. I haven't seen any negatives about this in any industry papers or press. I think with a small organization, what you described, I think would work.
These boats are operating, in a lot of cases, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So are you really designating a single person, or can you split the responsibilities over more than one individual or have a backup?
So you can split it up as long as you've got them covered. What you usually see is for a larger organization, say a company with 20 or 30 or more boats, might want to have two DPAs that handle, I don't know, one handles the river group, one handles the other group. When that DPA or one of them goes on vacation or is not available, a notice should be sent out for an alternate DPA. Now, under the subchapter, I don't believe there's any training required for DPAs, but it's a really good idea to do some training. In the international world, we do that with ocean companies. Again, the ISM code doesn't require training, but ASK will kind of push you that way. And if you're subject to oil company audits, they will really push them that way with doing some training.
Hi, this is Kevin Mullen. Hi, Rick. Thank you for that presentation. I wanted to ask you a question. Typically in the river industry, what I have seen and what has kind of evolved with Subchapter M is on a line haul boat, if there's a engineering problem, the engineer will let the captain know, and then the engineer will call his port engineer. Or if there is a scheduling or transportation industry with a deckhand or the cook, they'll come up and they'll call their dispatcher or they'll call somebody in HR. You know, the captain will generally talk to their compliance manager. You know, the compliance manager lets them know an audit or survey's coming up, whatever. Can you designate different people in the organization to be the DP?
Well, you can, but what you're describing is perfectly appropriate. You want the engineer on the boat to call the port engineer. So there's a misnomer in industry. Sometimes people think that the DPA has to be doing everything. That's impossible. Ensure that those processes are working, that the chief engineer has the ability to call and solve issues with the port engineer. if that's how the company wants to do it. Really appropriate, and we don't need the DPA involved with every time, you know, the starboard engine's got a leak. You don't wait for the internal audit. You want leading indicators in your company that the DPA is checking on these things and or these different functions. So we're talking, you know, if the engineering department has an issue with communications or resources, they can talk to the DPA. The language talks about between those on board. You could actually write it in your TSMIS to say, and shoreside people. So I kind of covered two things, but the whole, the way you describe is the right way to run a company. When I help a company, if they want a simple procedure on a DPA to ensure that DPA can monitor the effectiveness of the TSMIS, the DPA shall attend a minimum of 2 operations meetings a quarter, attend 1 risk assessment per year, whatever makes sense, in a list of things. But then if you write that down, you need to track that and make sure it's done, attend at least 1 boat audit, perhaps, things like that. The DPA really needs to be an expert on that TSMIS because he or she's responsible for the implementation. The regulation has painted the DPA into a little bit of a difficult situation. So we're trying to figure out, you know, ways, how can a DPA do it?
Great, thank you. Do you want to dive into the case study?
Yeah. So a fatality occurred on a ship with an engineer working on an electrical circuit. The ship's officers did not follow the TSMIS or the SMS exactly. And they weren't using the permit to work system in an electrical test room, a test room that's designed just for this purpose. But this SMS did not exempt that room, lockout, tag out. There's special precautions when you're actually working on a live circuit. This is an ocean-going ship. The person died, this great kid. The Coast Guard sent a letter to the DPA, and it was 1 page, but essentially said, we're assuming control. We think the safety management system is not being implemented. You know, call your local Coast Guard for more information. Something like that. I can't remember exactly, but that's a pretty alarming letter. This was an oil major. This is not a small company. Issued a major nonconformity against the vessel, but the Coast Guard did not stop the vessel. They started talking about corrective action. The company management went down and was talking directly with the captain of the port. And then the company decided to challenge the major nonconformity. They put in corrective and preventative actions, the training and use of the permit system while working on any electrical circuit, any place on the vessel. Then the company challenged the Coast Guard through the administrative law process and said, we don't think it's a major nonconformity. It's a nonconformity, and it kept going up the administrative process in the Coast Guard to appeal. It was overturned in favor of the company. Yes, it's not a major nonconformity. And the Coast Guard never shut down. It would be a big deal for a small company if you wanted to fight it. You could have just said, okay, fine, let's pick up the pieces and fix this thing and do whatever. But it shows you the extent. So, I mean, there were meetings where no less than 8, 10, 12 people in a room, 5, 6 Coast Guard captains, Coast Guard lawyers, ABS lawyers, ABS surveyors, ABS people that did the last audit, ISM audit of that company, the third-party audit. Coast Guard wanted to know why they didn't find this, what the Coast Guard said was a gap in the SMS. I would say this, number one, safety management is one of the most difficult things you do. If you think it's hard to run inland boats and barges and keep the oil in the tanks, and it is, it's even run a safety management system effectively. It's extremely difficult, but that's our job.
One thing I would point that might be helpful to people who you're talking a lot about ISM. I know there's publications out there that are available. Of course, you have additional training. We'll show up some of that here just in a moment, but there is an ISM code book out there that contains the code, and there are also implementation guides, if I'm not mistaken, in that same publication. So there's that's out there and available. I'm not saying or supporting or saying you should go get that, but that's additional resource if someone wanted to go out there and find that on the internet.
I actually published a book on the ISM code for mariners and managers, and it's on Amazon. Look, the big deal, I can't emphasize, a risk assessment really needs to reduce risk. It's not a paper exercise, which I suspect goes on a lot, quite frankly. A risk assessment needs to be painful for a company. It needs to cause the company to take different actions to reduce risk. And if you're not doing that, you're just kind of doing a paperwork thing, maybe you need to think about, are we really doing the right thing here? But our goal here is to reduce the risk of operational incidents. Not to zero. You can't get the risk to zero. And the only way to get it to zero is to not do the work. So I would say take this TSMA stuff very seriously and reach out, benchmark with other companies. Talk to your competitor. How do you do this? Not how do you do it so that you can pass an audit. That's not the question. To actually reduce risk in our company, to make it safer for the mariners and for the marine environment.
Good information, Rick. I'm going to go ahead and show this last slide here. I did mention that you've got some upcoming courses. There's a website there if you would like to reach out to get more information on Rick's courses or anything else that he might provide. Of course, the information for TVIB is shown there on the right.
Let me participate in all the good work everyone does. The river and coastwise industry is an amazing industry. You know, I spent 34 years at ExxonMobil, going from the world's largest oil company and then consulting to some of the smallest companies in the world down in the bayou for 5 guys shoreside. It's just amazing what this industry does. And most of the United States has no clue. Kind of closing, you know, I spent 20 years on the National Safety Council transport group. And one of the things we did a video on in 2012 based on 2010 data. So this is 11, 12 years ago. One of the things is the statistics in industry, all industries in the United States, freight, warehouses, linemen, trucks. 10 people were dying a day from industrial accidents in 2010, 10 a day. So around 3,700 people a day. With all these safety management systems, guess what the statistic is per day? Anybody want to take a guess? The bad news is it's 10 a day. We've not improved. I'm a member of the American Society of Safety Professionals consulting group. And it's mind-boggling. We haven't found the perfect answer. I think the river industry, shipping is doing better than some others, but overall it's about 10 a day.
I'll kind of add a thought onto what Rick was talking about there about the statistics and how we measure the success of safety management systems. And you know, I don't have the same level of experience Rick does, but and while this is abundantly obvious, I'll state the obvious, and that is, you know, writing a safety management system will not fix your problems. It won't. It's the implementation and the thorough implementation that gets there. And along that line is, don't expect immediate results. You can't write a book, for lack of better words, and think you're going to be there tomorrow. It's a journey that starts the day you're ready to engage, and it won't end until you disengage. So I would just encourage people to have those safety management systems and then make sure you follow them. Don't let them be dust collectors on the shelf or your virtual binder, if you will.
That's interesting what you say. I think you're spot on. And in ExxonMobil, my last job there, I was the vetting manager for all of North America and the Caribbean and Canada. And we looked at global, how long does it take a company, if we stood up a new company, we being industry, a new marine operator, brand new boats, new people, everything. And so they get a brand new management system, and that management system starts taking hold such that risk is really reduced. And we actually came up with some analysis, and we came up with 7 years. It takes a while, and it could be longer, it could be shorter, but it does not happen quick. You're right.
Again, I want to thank Rick for taking the time to talk with everybody today.
But I would just say, if anybody wants to communicate with me for any reason, and look for my company, SafeMARINER, on LinkedIn, or Richard D. Dunn on LinkedIn, and we'll talk.
So thank you, everyone.